Let's bring in Lizette Lancaster, Manager for Crime and Justice Information Hub, to unpack the recent crime stats released by the Minister a short while ago. Lizette, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. So, police have reported that nearly 7,000 people were murdered between July and September this year. Although this is another drop from the first quarter, as they've indicated, a recent report released by the Institute for Security Studies is concerning. It says that the murder rate in South Africa, has reached its highest mark in 20 years. Your reaction to the latest murder stats?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. It is encouraging that for the second quarter in a row that we have seen very small decreases. This is less than 1% compared to last year's quarter two. But it is the first time in about 12 years that we are seeing slight reductions. So if it continues, of course, it means that we have stabilized our murder rate and murder stats at a very, very high level. However, I think it's very early to celebrate. We are still seeing that this means that 76 people a day lose their life on average in South Africa. 10 of them are women, 3 of them are children. And that means that there are about 63 men a day that lose their lives. So that is still a little bit higher than last year's average or annual crime statistics. So we are hoping that this is starting to turn the tide, but of course, I don't think it's time to celebrate yet.
Just talking about not being time to celebrate, I mean, some of the statistics that were released today, they are quite puzzling, particularly as we look at some of the provinces, that over the past couple of months have been really at the center of some of these high murder rates. The minister saying that KwaZulu-Natal, Limpopo are recording double-digit decreases of murder, which is quite surprising because we've been seeing, mass killings in KwaZulu-Natal specifically. On some occasions, 7 people at a time being mowed down, every single day. So how do we then reconcile that KwaZulu-Natal and Limpopo are seeing these drops, but then yet we see these crimes being committed on a daily basis?
Yes, I think what it points to and what the Institute for Security, our report points to, is that murder is very much a story of 4 provinces. It is the story, 83% of murders in the previous financial year came from Western Cape, Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. They are the most populous, but they also sit with the highest crime and violence burden. So a double-digit drop in KwaZulu-Natal still means that it had a huge increase in the previous financial year. So what we are probably seeing is that some of those organized crime groups and some of the mass murders, there have been some stabilization. But I don't think it's time to celebrate. It was just from an abnormally high base. What we also see is a 12.5% increase in attempted murders. So less murders, but more attempted murders. So that's puzzling. And then, of course, the Western Cape, that has been very stable over the past 2 or 3 years at high levels, are seeing almost 11% increase in this quarter. So it just shows you how fragile police operations and dealing with murder can be. And that's why we are so adamant that we need very long-term as well as medium and short-term sustained interventions, not just once-off types of police operations or sporadic planning or reactive planning to emerging gangs, but sustained resources in these high crime areas.
Let's bring in another concerning number now, and of course that is around GBV. We understand just in 3 months, that's essentially 90 days, 10,516 rape cases were recorded during this period. And of course, breaking it down to say, of the 10,516, 4,726 of these rapes took place, A, in the home of the victim, or B, in the home of the perpetrator who is known, to the victim. How do we read into these numbers?
The first important thing to remember about rape figures is we never know the true undercount. Murder is, for instance, the most reliable proxy for violence because the number, you can measure it physically with, unfortunately, bodies. With rapes, we know that the under-reporting to the police are exceptionally high. It can be as high as 1 in 25 murders, according to certain surveys. 1 in 25 rapes being reported to the police because of fear of trauma, stigmatization, and just wanting not to share these very painful and deep types of stories. And then we also know that most women are most at risk by being harmed by their intimate partners or people close to them. So these statistics are not surprising. What it is a scourge that has, we have paid a lot of attention to it. We have seen more resources allocated to GBV. We know, for instance, that in the police, the Family and Violent Crime Unit detection rate is far higher than any other group or detectives detection rate. They sit on nearly 70%. So we have many good men and women that are investigating and taking care of victims of crime. And we are seeing successes there. But of course, this is a scourge that's sometimes beyond the police. We need to really, really educate our men and women, men and young kids. We've seen successful school programs in places like Kenya where norms and cultures around women and men are broken down, and young boys and teenagers and young girls and teenagers are learned not to mete out violence against gender and not to accept violence from the opposite gender. So we really need to have tough conversations about GBV.
I'm glad you draw out, some successes. The minister himself saying that they are seeing some positive trends emerging since the previous quarter in terms of their policing. But another worrying thing, unfortunately, these crime stats don't, have us celebrating. You obviously addressed the fact that there are still 8,000, detectives shortage within the SAPS. I want to address this, particularly as it speaks to some of the crimes that are very difficult to crack for police. To what extent does this shortage, hinder on particularly, the investigation part of it, especially where you have successes in, for instance, we've just seen successes in the insurance fraud, case where Rosemary Ndlovu case, another arrest has been made now, where you need detectives to actually sit with a case up to 2 to 6 months, where you can have a successful arrest and possibly a successful prosecution. How worried are you about this shortfall?
We are very worried because it's one thing to arrest would-be or suspects. It's another thing to get them prosecuted, to get a court-ready docket. We know, for instance, for murder, the detection rate, that means cases ready to go to court, is only 12.5%. It has dropped significantly through the years. We know that, these priority crime areas, these 17 community crime areas, we're talking about 44%, if I remember correctly, from the previous year's detection rate. So more than half of cases are not being solved to the benefit. For murder, it's almost 9 in 10. And we know that some of these, especially murder, are very complicated types of cases to investigate because, unfortunately, somebody is deceased and cannot be a witness to the crime. Whereas assaults are slightly easier because you often have witnesses and the victim can testify themselves. The same with any crimes where there are survivors and victims, if they're not too scared to come forward. So we are very concerned because the success of the criminal justice system lies within detection of cases. If people don't believe it, if the populace don't believe that cases will be prosecuted and there will be consequences for their actions, we will see this type of high levels of crime because people think they'll get away with that. And furthermore, we also know that this breaks down trust in the police, which just causes this evil cycle where detectives cannot get information from the public because they are not trusted. So it is really, really important, and the minister has pointed out some of his interventions, putting detectives where at these high crime areas, making sure crime intelligence is restructured from what I could tell to start working better with detectives. And we've been calling for that too. It is really critical that there are detection or intelligence guided investigations.